When David sins with Bathsheba, it's Nathan who comes to him and says, "You're the one who sinned." And that ability to speak truth to power is the prophetic gift. And even though the prophets were discarded sometimes and oppressed and so on, we don't really have a tradition of the prophets being killed, which is true in many other traditions, like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel. They're mistreated horribly, but they manage somehow to survive. And the same is true even going back to the Torah of Moses. You know, it sounds strange to say that no one killed Moses. But the truth is that in most of human history, leaders who say things that people don't want to hear, we know this from even American history, often don't escape with their lives. So the reason that they do is because the one thing that endures is the covenant. The covenant is pronounced in the Torah and then enacted in the Tanakh, because it isn't really until you get into the land that the covenant is tested. And here is a question that exists today. It hasn't existed for many years, but exists today, which is that the greatest test of the Jewish tradition and its morality is actually not powerlessness, but power. You are tested morally much more when you have power than when you are powerless. Much more when you have the capacity to oppress than when you are the one that is oppressed. And once Israel has its own land, then you judge it differently from when Israel were slaves in Egypt, because you have much more ability to be immoral if you have power. The powerless have very little scope. And I can't is a very different thing from I won't, as everyone knows, right? I mean, to just take an easy and somewhat uncharged example, if you have a kid and you want to raise them not to be spoiled, it's very easy to say to your kid, "I can't afford that." It's much harder to say to your kid, "I can afford that, but I won't get it for you." Much harder. Power gives you tests. Wealth gives you tests that powerlessness and poverty don't. They're different tests. And it isn't until Israel comes into the land that they have the tests of power. And then the other thing that is important to remember before we talk about what we're going to do next time, and then I'll take questions, is the other remarkable thing about this whole section of the Torah, and all of it, is that there are no superheroes. Every character is deeply flawed, and even the heroes are flawed. And the only people that don't do something wrong are people who have very short stories. It's really true. If you want to say, this one person did this righteous act, and now let's tell you about the other people, then maybe all you know about the person is they did this righteous act. But everybody who actually has any kind of arc of the narrative, you find out that they do terrible things as well as good things. And even though we may remember them as heroes, once you read the story, you realize that heroes are always, always human. And that's true for everybody in the Torah. It was true in the 5 books, and it's certainly true in Tanakh again and again and again, whether they are prophets or kings or just ordinary people along the way, including sometimes people who otherwise would seem to be condemnatory but manage to rise to do noble acts. And here, let's circle back just for a minute. When I was a kid, I was in Harrisburg up until 6th grade. I went to yeshiva, which is Orthodox religious school. And I remember that we read Joshua, and the only reason I remember it is because I remember we skipped over a part. And so, like probably the rest of my classmates, it was the only time I voluntarily read part of the Bible, was I wanted to know why, because the teacher said, and we're going to move now, I don't remember what it was, like from chapter 3, let's go to chapter 6. So the reason is because when Joshua and Caleb come into Israel, the person who helps them is Rahav, who is a zonah, which is often translated innkeeper. But zonah in ancient Hebrew, just like in modern Hebrew, does not mean innkeeper, even though I'm sure Motel 6 was useful to her. You can imagine what it actually means. It means, let us say, lady of the evening. But the fact that a prostitute was the one who enabled Joshua and Caleb to be hidden and to be saved is very characteristic of the Torah. It's like, this may not be the person that you would think would prove to be righteous, but you can't judge people so easily, because actually she's the one who proved to be righteous when the rest of the people were not. So it's not only that the heroes prove to be flawed, but the flawed people turn out to be heroes, which is a really wonderful thing and is characteristic of the entire story of the Torah. Now, the thing that we've had so far is we've had narrative, we've had entry into the land, we've had prophecy, and we've had drama. What we haven't had so much is wisdom or piety or prayer, and all of that, or for that matter, really not so much love stories. There's a little bit in Torah and Tanakh. I wouldn't say there's none, but I mean, not compared to like the average spate of movies or novels or anything like that. All of that gets made up for in the third division of Tanakh, in the Ketuvim. That's where you get Job and Kohelet and the Song of Songs and Jonah and Ruth and stories that reflect wisdom, piety, romance, all of that. But all of that is for next time, and so let's stop there and take questions. And also,